Welcome, welcome, everyone. Great. Well, my name is Susan Sikakoptu. I serve as Assistant Agent for the federally recognized tribal extension program up here on the Hopi Reservation. It's a U of A cooperative extension program just for our community. So we're really glad you could join us tonight, on Monday night, beginning of the month. We try and look to offer and organize education around a variety type of ag projects for our community. So we're really glad you're able to come. These webinars tonight are tailored for community members who have raised chickens. Maybe you've already done it or done it in the past, or maybe you're doing it now, or maybe you want to do it for the first time. You're not quite sure where to start, or you've tried it and you've had problems. This is just for you guys. The whole webinar series is really focused on raising laying hens for eggs, although we will touch on other subjects related to chickens because they produce other kinds of food for us. But that's really where we're going to focus our energy tonight. Let me share my screen briefly and remind you that this is the series that we're working on tonight. Tonight's topic is housing and predator management regarding poultry. And as you'll notice, we have two more workshops coming up next 2 months as well. And these are all scheduled for the first Monday night of the month. And they're all going to be at 6 p.m. Mountain Standard. So next month in April, we'll be talking about diseases and I'm sure how to combat those. And then the last class is egg and food safety. So I hope you'll join us for those. And I'm going to turn the time and now over to Miss Ashley Wright, who's going to teach the class tonight. She'll tell you a bit more about herself.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. I'm Ashley Wright. I'm a livestock agent with the University of Arizona Cooperative Extension. I'm actually based down Cochise, Santa Cruz. Mostly I work with beef producers running cow-calf operations, but I do occasionally get to do other things like chicken stuff, and I do have chickens myself. So I do quite a bit of talking on this, particularly in the Tucson area, because there are a lot of people that now have chickens there. So this is the second webinar that we've done. Last month, we talked about raising chicks, raising pullets for laying hens, how to successfully raise them from chick. And then we talked a little bit about nutrition for sort of all life stages. So today we're going to talk about housing and predator control. So let me just get my slides up. The reason that this is Poultry Practices is my friend Colt, who did his PhD here at the University of Arizona, and I have been doing some things together, even though he's at the University of Maine and I'm at the University of Arizona. It actually works out fairly well because he can cover the cold weather topics and I can cover the hot weather topics. So we've been doing some things together. So some of these slides are his that I've borrowed and some are mine that I've created. And so that's why his name is on this presentation also. Before we talk about housing, I want to just do a quick refresher of a topic we covered last time, which was setting up your brooder for chicks. And I just want to really quickly go back over some of the basics of that before we move into adult chicken housing. So to start with, when we're setting up our brooder, we want to make sure that we're doing this in a clean, dry, a ventilated and a draft-free area, and preferably someplace that's enclosed and safe from predators because those baby chicks are extremely fragile. We need to make sure we have a light source and a heat source most likely. And it's really good to set that up in advance. Some things people have successfully used. Those stock tanks are very popular. Plastic swimming pools with, you see she's got some netting over the top. I really am a fan of the dog crate. A wire dog crate is my go-to. People have made their own out of wooden, this wooden one in the corner down there. But anything you can think of really works as long as it has sides to keep the chicks contained. And depending on where it is, you may need a top to keep predators and things like pets and children out of it. Those baby chicks do need heat, supplemental heat. They need to be 95 degrees when they first are hatched on day 0 to 1. And every week after that, you can actually reduce the temperature in that brooder by about 5 degrees until the chicks have fully developed feathers, which is around 8 to 10 weeks old. And at that point, they should be down to a normal sort of room temperature, 60 to 70 degrees. Heat lamps are the most common way people do this. Do be very cautious with those. We do see a lot of fires and problems if they aren't secured properly. But the heating plates and stuff are becoming very popular nowadays too. Those clamps on those heat lamps, as far as I'm concerned, those things are designed to fail. They will fall off if they get hit on anything, and if those heat lamps land on something that's very flammable, like pine shavings that are often in the bottom of brooders, it's very easy to cause a fire. I always recommend hanging those heat lamps with something sturdy, a chain and a clip, rather than relying on that clamp. Just take that clamp off and throw it away. If you are using those hanging heat lamps, especially if you have that brooder inside or in a climate controlled environment, you don't need to use those high powered 250 watt bulbs. They will be way too warm. You can get a lower 150 watt, or even some of them will accept a standard incandescent bulb, and those often do put out enough heat. So those 100 watt incandescents or the 125 watts are fine. Again, those 250 watts, really, you only need those if you have a very large brooder, or if you have a brooder that is outside, maybe in a place that's not as environmentally controlled as a house. And there's a quick and easy way to tell if your brooder is too warm or too cold. Number one is listen to those chicks. If they're making a lot of really high-pitched distress type noises, oftentimes it's because something is wrong. Either a predator is bothering them, maybe the cat is sitting up there, or they're too warm or too cold. But the other thing you can look at is their distribution in the brooder. So if we pretend all the little blue dots are baby chicks, and the yellow ring is our heat source and sort of that concentrated spot right under that lamp. In scenario number one there, those chicks are actually pretty perfectly distributed fairly evenly throughout our brooder. In number two, the temperature is probably a little bit too cold. Those chicks are all huddled together right underneath that light source trying to get warm. In scenario number three, this one down here, we see all those chicks huddled on one side. That usually means there's a draft or something going on that's making them uncomfortable. And in number four, these chicks are far too warm. They're spread out around the outside, trying to get out from underneath that light source. And finally, as we're talking about chicks, the two biggest questions that I get asked, number one is, when can my chicks go outside? Generally, and by outside, I mean out to the big coop, to the real chicken coop. That's going to be around 8 to 10 weeks old, or when they're fully feathered. So these chicks on the right are actually probably a little bit older than that, and they've got all their feathers. They don't have any more chick down. And you can usually tell because they start looking a little less scraggly at that point. And that's if the temps are relatively mild, so at least 50 degrees Fahrenheit. If it's still dropping down into the 30s and 40s at night, it might still be a smidge too cold. Or maybe they could be put out with a light out there in the evening. And the second question I get asked, when can my chicks be housed with my older existing flock? So this is if you're maybe raising some new chicks to integrate into your older flock. And generally the rule is we want them to be about 80% or more of adult size. If they're too much smaller than the adult hens, they're likely to get picked on and bullied. And the other thing to consider is it's preferable to wait until they are close to beginning to lay, or you'll need to switch those older hens off of their layer feed into either they can go straight onto Chick Start with some oyster shell supplement until those new hens are also laying. We don't want those young pullets to be consuming an excess of calcium like what's in layer feed until they're about ready to lay. It will mess up their growth and development. It's not good for their bones, and it's not good for their kidneys to have that much calcium until they're actually starting to lay eggs. And we did touch on that a little bit last time. So when the recording is up, you'll be able to go back and check that out. Okay, so now that we've talked really briefly again about chicks, let's talk about our adult chickens and the housing situation here. So my goal with this presentation is not to tell you you need to build a coop this way using these things. It's really to talk to you about the principles that make something a good coop and that make something acceptable to making sure that the hens are healthy, that they're protected from predators, and to make your management easier. And then from there, you should be able to hopefully apply those to whatever situation you are in. And as you can see from these pictures, people have made some successful coops out of a variety of things. We have somebody here who's gone above and beyond and made like a chicken palace. We have a pretty standard purchased coop here. This Interesting looking Quonset hut situation. This looks like it was probably a shed with a run added on. I see a lot of people that do that. They have an old structure already existing on their property. Maybe it's an old tool shed or something similar. Easily converted into a chicken coop, add a little run, and you're in business. This looks like another pre-purchased option here. And this one fascinates me with the old car. People have made some very, very interesting coops out of some cool things. So the sky's the limit. My goal here is to give you the principles to make sure that whatever you decide to make work for you will work. Portable coops are also something that people sometimes use. These coops are able to be picked up and moved. So this is really convenient if you have a large area and you want to move the chickens around so that they can maybe scratch different areas of the yard or the garden at different times. And you can kind of move these daily or weekly depending on what you're doing. So this particular one in the middle is a really nice one because the chickens are still pretty protected. Something like this one, it looks like they probably let them out to free range. I struggle with that a little bit in Arizona. We have, I think, an excess of predators compared to other places. Free ranging chickens is very difficult unless you have good fences are there and maybe some livestock guardian dogs. But we'll talk a little bit about that when we get to predators. So the things that make a chicken coop a good chicken coop. So number one is it's properly sized. It's easy to access and easy to get into and clean. We like a lot of natural light, and I'll talk a little bit about that at the end, about how light affects the chicken's egg laying abilities. We want good ventilation. That's important whether you're in Southern Arizona or Northern Arizona. In Southern Arizona, we struggle with the heat. Maybe even some of you in Western Arizona have that problem as well. In Northern Arizona, you may struggle some with heat, but you're probably going to have some issues with it being cold. But even in the cold, we don't want to completely enclose that coop. We still need some ventilation. Weatherproofing, making sure that our chickens are able to get out of the rain, the snow, that kind of thing. Placement of roosts and nesting boxes is really key to making sure we get clean eggs and that our chickens are sleeping where they're supposed to be sleeping. And finally, predator proof, making sure that our chickens are protected because everything loves to eat chicken. So let's talk about that size. So a properly sized coop, just the coop without the run, about 2 to 3 square feet per bird is sufficient. So this is actually a picture of my old coop. The building, the brown building in the center there is the coop itself, and it's an 8x8, which means that it's 64 square feet. So I can have up to 30 birds comfortably in there. I generally don't have that many, but I could comfortably do that if I needed to. In addition to that, if we're going to have a run, a fenced-in area for the chickens to go outside in during the day, the rule of thumb there's about 8 to 10 square feet per bird in that run. And you can fudge these numbers a little bit. So if you have a little extra space in the run and your coop's a little smaller, that's probably okay. The other thing we want to consider is roosting space. Chickens will roost at night, meaning they will like to find some place high to sleep. So we want to provide them with a roost that's in the coop so that it's protected. And the general rule of thumb is 9 to 12 inches of horizontal space per bird. And finally, nesting boxes for our laying hens. 1 box for every 4 to 5 hens is sufficient. They'll probably all still try to use the same one, but 1 for every 4 to 5 hens is what is recommended. So in terms of being easily accessed to clean, so ideally we'd like to be able to walk inside the run and even inside the coop if we can. Some of the smaller ones are just meant where you can open the door and kind of sweep them out. We do want to make sure we're keeping it fairly clean and particularly inside the coop. The run we can get away with a little bit more. Ammonia is a problem if it builds up. We don't want to see a whole lot of manure and wet and damp on the floor. As long as it's dry, it's okay. Solid floors with a bedding are very common, maybe a wood floor or even just a dirt floor with bedding. That's all I use. And then I bring in sand here in Southern Arizona. It works pretty well. It stays very dry. It drains very well. And it's easy to rake the manure out when I need to. And for me, this is my own personal, I like to make sure there's no hiding places for mice and snakes. I've seen some coops where they've raised them up on pallets. I feel like that little 3 or 4 inch space under the pallets is just begging for rattlesnakes to decide to live there. And I try to avoid that. I either want things on the ground where nothing can go under, or I want enough space where it's not a tempting place for something like that to hide. We talk about natural lighting and ventilation. Daylight, the number of hours of sunlight there are in a day, really drives the chickens' natural rhythms. First of all, when we talk about their sleep-wake cycles, they don't see really well at night at all. In fact, they pretty much shut down. If you've ever gone out to visit chickens at night while they're roosting, chickens that you normally could not get within 10 feet of during the day, you can walk right up and pick them right up off the roost because they kind of go a little bit night dumb. You can't even see them coming. Or they can't see you coming, like they don't even try to get away. It also really drives egg production in these hens. And so making sure we have a lot of natural lighting and natural daylight helps to keep our chickens in cycle. And I have some information towards the end about providing supplemental lighting if you're interested in having eggs all year round. And then that ventilation is really important in hot climates. So this is the front of my coop. So I live in Southern Arizona. It's very hot down here. So I designed my coop with ventilation in mind. So I don't know if you can see, this is an 8x8 building. And the back wall and halfway up the two sides are solid, but all the rest, this front side, the whole front and this front half are just hardware cloth. And I did this specifically because I wanted maximum ventilation so that in the summertime, this coop did not become a hot box and just become obnoxiously hot inside. The other strategy that's often used is they'll put these cupolas. Sometimes you see the metal ones that spin in the roof. That allows hot air to come up and escape out the top. That's really key to keeping a coop cool as well. If you live somewhere a little bit colder, you may want to maybe enclose a little bit more of this. But ventilation is still important. I would leave some openings, like I would open these up and wire them in up along the top, even if I solid-sided some more of this in, or put in this particular plan has some windows in it, just something so that you can allow some air movement even in the winter time. What we don't want to do is completely enclose that because the chickens do put off some moisture with their breath and with their droppings and things. And what will happen is it will get very moist and damp inside that coop very quickly. So we want to make sure there's enough airflow to change the air over and dry things out. We just really want to make sure we're blocking drafts and rain. And that brings us to weatherproofing. So this coop in particular was actually probably in Maine, in a very cold northern climate, obviously. So they've had to do a lot of weatherproofing, but you notice it still has ventilation. These windows just have screens on them. These look like they will open. These windows have screens on them. The big thing with weatherproofing is we want to make sure that our chickens can get out of the rain and out of the wet and out of the snow. Okay, a chicken who's wet will get cold, but heat is generally unnecessary as long as the chickens can stay dry and out of the wind. Chickens are actually very cold tolerant, much more so than they are heat tolerant. Weather down into the teens really doesn't bother them as long as they're able to stay dry and out of the wind. And so we don't really find, at least in my experience, in most places in Arizona, even in northern Arizona, heating our coop is not usually necessary. When we talk about roost placement, roosts are a purchase. So these chickens will sleep on these roosts. We obviously want them inside the coop because we want our chickens to be safe inside the coop at night when they aren't able to escape predators. Ideally, they're about 3 feet-ish tall. And one of the keys is that they need to be taller than the nest boxes. And we'll get to why that is in a minute. 18 inches apart is usually ideal. I like this ladder staggered style. The chickens don't have to do a whole lot of jump. They can jump up onto this lower one and then jump to each one. And they're set far enough apart that the chickens that are on the one are not pooping on the one down below. If you remember from our nutrition talk, chickens consume a lot of food during the day, but when they're sleeping, they store a lot of it in their crop. And then when they're sleeping, they kind of go through and basically digest everything that's left in their crop from the day. So while they're sleeping, they're usually doing a lot of pooping. And so you'll see very commonly, these are called dropping boards. And in this case, this person used a tarp. You will collect a significant portion of manure doing this way. You don't have to do that. The nice thing about it is that you can just pull those, like this one looks like it's 2 trays that you could literally just pull out and dump and put back in, and you're gonna significantly cut down on the labor necessary to clean your coop by using something like these trays, because they will catch a significant portion of the manure. Again, you don't have to do that. Mine just fall on the ground and I just rake it up. That's also totally fine. Made from wood for these perches is really what's ideal. And a lot of people think that they need to be round, but actually we don't want round perches. Chickens aren't like birds that will grab with their feet. They actually tend to sit fairly flat-footed. And so what we found works best, a 2x4 laid on its side so that the 4-inch side is up, is actually what's sort of ideal. 3 to 4 inches wide is the best. So that 2x4 on its side is really an ideal width, and it allows what it allows the chickens to do, if you've noticed in this picture, for most of them you can't see any of their toes, just this one has its toes out, and that actually really helps in cold weather. They're able to sort of have those toes kind of sucked up underneath their feathers, and that helps to protect them from frostbite if it is cold. And again, that 9 to 12 inches of horizontal space per bird is what we want to make sure that we have in our when we talk about nesting boxes. Again, 1 box for every 4 to 5 hens. We want these a little lower than those roosts. We want them about 18 inches off the floor. And the reason for that is when chickens like to roost at night, they try to be as high as they can be. And if your nest boxes are higher than your roosts, they're actually going to start trying to sleep in their nest box. Remember what I said about sleeping chickens? Sleeping chickens are pooping chickens. If you're having problems with nest boxes that are full of manure or eggs that are coming out really dirty, this might be what's going on. You may have chickens that are trying to sleep in your nest boxes and sort of dirtying up the situation here. So ideally, keep those nest boxes sort of low and keep your roosts much higher. That should resolve that problem. So for the actual nesting space itself, 12 by 12 by 12 with a little 4 to 6 inch lip on the front is really, really ideal. Larger birds may need like a 14-inch width, but that 12 by 12 should fit about everything. Having a little bit of a perch in front helps make accessing the box a little bit easier. Putting grass hay or pine shavings in is ideal. I am a big fan of using, this is actually my setup right here, and I have a better picture to show you in a second. I use those plastic dish pans from the dollar store, and I size mine to fit those perfectly, because this way if there is an accident in the box, maybe somebody breaks an egg, has a little bit of a poop accident, it's easy for me to pull that whole tray out, clean it, and put fresh bedding in it without too much of a hassle, so that I'm always getting clean, fresh eggs. These little Made Smart crates, plastic crates, also work very well for that. And then this one in particular I wanted to show you is a roll-away nest box. And what happens is that this floor is actually, I think, carpeting, and that works well as long as you can pull it out and wash it off if needed. But you see there's a gap back here, and this box is actually angled slightly back. So when that chicken lays her egg, the egg will actually, when she stands up, the egg will roll to the back and not be accessible to her anymore. This is a really great option if you are having a problem with chickens consuming eggs. So some chickens will habitually become egg eaters. There's a few ways. If you catch it early, you can break them of that. You can pick up eggs really quickly and put in like some golf balls, or they actually make some fake eggs that look so much like real eggs. You can't even tell the difference until you try to crack them. They're wooden. Golf balls also work. And they'll peck at them a few times and realize, oh, this isn't working. I can't eat this. It's hard and it hurts. And they'll stop doing it. But once you get one that's sort of a habitual egg eater, it's very hard to break them. So short of culling them out of your flock, which you can do too, these roll-away nest boxes can help with that, because as soon as they stand up, that egg is no longer accessible to them, and nobody else's egg is accessible to them. And this is the slightly better picture of my nest box setup. Now, I will tell you, this is actually a little too high off the ground. I need to lower this down to about half of where it is. I haven't had trouble with chickens trying to sleep in it because it's actually in the run, not in the coop. And the nice thing about it is, if you see, this is actually the top, I can actually access my eggs from outside of the coop. I don't have to go inside the coop. I don't have to go inside the run. I can just lift the top up, grab the eggs, and close the lid right back down again. And I mentioned those chickens like to roost as high as possible. So these are some of my baby chicks from a few cycles ago that decided that the dog crate that used to be their brooder was the preferable roosting space. So we had to learn some things. And then they went in the coop and decided, this was my old nest box setup, that they wanted to roost in the nest boxes. So I covered the front of the nest boxes and they decided to roost on top of them. The reason they did this is because this was a much higher setup than where the actual roosting bars were. So once we sort of got that straightened out and I got the nest boxes moved and the roosts raised, everybody started sleeping where they belonged. So again, if that's a problem that you're having, this is how you can fix it. So I do want to talk about winter housing. I know many of you are up in northern Arizona where you maybe get a little more winter weather than what we do here down in southern Arizona. The big takeaways with that, we want to make sure we keep that coop clean and dry and using some sort of a bedding substrate on the floor of the coop. So I usually don't. I usually pretty much just have dirt floors. But you may want to actually consider putting a 4 to 6 inch deep layer of bedding on the floor of that coop. It will help with insulation and help with warmth, and just try to make sure that you're sifting through it and rotating through it so that it doesn't get really gross. As you see in this little table here, ammonia levels can have significant consequences for chickens, and you can start to smell ammonia pretty quickly in a coop if you aren't keeping it clean and dry. You can also consider insulating your coop for some warmth. If you do that, make sure you're covering it up because chickens will peck it out and eat it, and it's definitely not good for them. I would consider maybe putting it in between if you have an old converted shed, put it in the studs and put a sheet of plywood over it, those sorts of things. The biggest thing that will go a long way towards helping your chickens handle the winter is to eliminate drafts. So plastic covering, but make sure you maintain some ventilation. So those little baffles at the top, you can leave those open. What I tend to do on mine is in the wintertime, I actually will put tarps down. You saw the two sides were open. I'll put tarps down those two open sides so that only the front is open. That just blocks a lot more of the wind up the side and keeps my coop plenty comfortable. Some things that might be helpful, we talked about these last time. These are those little Govee Bluetooth sensors. You can also just use a regular old thermometer if you want to. Just keep an eye on that temperature in that coop. But anything even down into the teens is certainly handleable for adult chickens with all their feathers, and supplemental heat really isn't needed. But if we are in a situation where we're having some freezing, be aware things that freeze, water, eggs will freeze, bedding, and we could have some trouble with frostbite. I don't really think we get cold enough in Arizona. I think this is going to be more of a Maine issue, but it is something to keep in mind. Things that affect the birds, the air, feed, and water quality. If we have frozen water, we need to make sure we're either going out and busting it up a few times a day or investing in a heated water supply of some kind. Make sure we're practicing biosecurity and rodent control, especially in the winter. If we have things that attract rodents, they may want to move into the coop because it's comfortable and warm. And finally, predator pressure. Our housing adjustments for the winter, we don't have as many as Maine would need to take. So for example, chickens don't generally like to go out in the snow or the wet or the icky weather. They're, at least in my experience, they're fairly fair weather. They will tend to stay in their coop. So we don't tend to have weeks and weeks and weeks of bad weather that keep chickens inside like they do in other places of the country. But if we have a few days where the chickens tend to be inside because the weather is crummy, we're having a winter storm go through or something similar, do be aware that you'll probably need to go in there and clean that coop out a little more frequently. When they're all hanging out in that much smaller, more enclosed space, you're going to have more buildup of manure and things like that. You'll probably also have some issues with maybe birds wanting to get bored or pick on each other. I don't think that's as big of an issue for us. As I mentioned, I don't really feel like they're stuck inside where those are issues here in Arizona as much as in other places, but it is something to think about. And then finally, that ventilation issue we've been talking about. So here's some safe heating alternatives to a heat lamp. I really discourage the use of heat lamps unless that is your only option. In a coop, it is very easy to burn a coop down if those lamps fall. But they make these heating pads or flat heater panels that you can actually mount against the wall that can create some natural air movement. This one, as the air heats it and comes up, cool air moves in to kind of take its place and kind of keeps the ventilation flowing. Here in Arizona, I don't know if that's worth the investment for most of us. I just don't feel like it gets cold enough. But what you can do is some of these other tips. Insulate. If you can get a hold of some insulation, you can actually sometimes find it used at construction sites pretty easily. Just make sure that you prevent your birds from accessing it once you put it up. You can add some extra bedding materials to the floor, as we talked about. Make sure you seal off any drafts. Sometimes you could just winterize your coop even with some plastic or tarps or things like that. Works really well. These plastic flaps over the opening of your coop hole where the chickens enter and exit can help hold in a little extra heat. Just make sure you train those birds. You may have to show them a few times how to use it. This person's gone really high tech and has put a webcam and a thermometer in there. If you have the ability to do that, great, but I really don't feel like our coops get so cold that we need to monitor them quite that closely. These plastic sheeting or roofing panels work really well as even something like plywood. If you have access to maybe some old metal roofing, things like that, you can actually line the sidewall, and I'll show you some videos in mine where I used wooden fence to help block some wind into the run. Anything you can do to help block that wind from blowing across can help keep your chickens more comfortable. The big thing is going to be those frozen waters. Most of the time we don't stay below freezing during the day for most days, even in northern Arizona. I don't think you guys really do that very often. So generally just going out and busting the ice off the water first thing in the morning and maybe in the afternoon is probably pretty sufficient. For most of us, I would think. And then finally, if you have windows or openings, you can cover those up, bubble wrap. That Reflectix stuff works, dark blankets, curtains from the dollar store, anything like that. Just to block some of that up will help. Just remember to always leave at least some ventilation. And so as we move on, let's talk a little bit about how we can make sure that we're protecting our chickens from predators in the coop. And as we get towards the end, I have a few coops that I want to talk about kind of the good and the bad of both, or of all of them, so that you can maybe get a feel for how you might build a coop that will work for you. So as we talked about, nearly everything likes to eat chicken. And I think probably our two biggest ones here in Arizona are going to be bobcats and coyotes. They're very common even in suburban areas. They're usually most active at night, but we do sometimes see them during the day. If we have birds out free roaming, the coyotes like to pull the snatch and run of free-ranging birds. They will come in, snatch a bird, and take off. Bobcats like to break into coops. They will remove heads. There'll be claw marks. They will pretty much kill everything in the coop and then maybe haul some of them off to stash somewhere. The best thing that you can do to prevent these from accessing your birds is to make sure that your coop is predator proof so that they can't even get in. You can also use things like motion lights, motion sprinklers, and or electrified fencing may help. I would not rely on those exclusively though. And something you guys may see maybe a little more of it up north than we do, bears and mountain lions. These guys are really capable of shredding a lot of things. Chicken wire, bird netting, they'll shred it to pieces in a second. Make sure you're very secure with your coop and your run. If these are something that you think you may have a problem with, use high strength materials, and whatever roof you have on your coop should be able to support the weight of a lion. And then try to keep things like trash, keep your chicken feed locked up somewhere so that bears can't get into it, because they will be attracted to those sort of things and then maybe decide to have a little chicken along with their side of chicken feed. Again, those motion lights, sprinklers, electrified fence might help. We have a lot of these in southern Arizona. I'm not sure how many of them you have up north, except maybe the raccoons, which are kind of everywhere. Most likely these are going to consume eggs or younger animals, although raccoons have been known to go into coops and rip heads off of chickens and just have a good old time in there. The other thing is that many of these, especially the raccoons, are really able to open simple latches. So I see a lot of people wanting to secure their coop with those little hook and eye type things. A raccoon can open that in 5 seconds flat. So I really encourage using some type of clasp that has to be opened. That's much tougher for a raccoon to actually manage to figure out. I'm a big fan of the carbiner clips. I use those frequently. And hawks. Particularly this slide is about Harris hawks, but we have all species of hawks all over the state. We also have eagles in some places, and they are not above taking a chicken for a snack. The Harris hawks in particular are a problem for me. Here in the Southwest, and particularly in the Sonoran Desert, they actually will hunt like a wolf pack. So a normal strategy that can help protect your chickens from hawks is to make sure that they have places where they can go under things. Under bushes, some people will build these little, almost like a little table that's low to the ground that the chickens can go hide under when they see a hawk, someplace where they can get out of dive bombing reach. But that doesn't really work with the Harris hawks because they do hunt in a group. There'll be 3 to 7. I have a family of 5 that roams my neighborhood, and they hunt almost like a wolf pack. 2 or 3 will sit up on something. They like my antenna, my trees, sometimes right on the top of the coop. And the other couple will actually get down on the ground and flush the chickens out from the places that they are hiding so that the ones sitting up can bomb on them. So providing just those dive bomb shelters for chickens is not super effective if you have Harris hawks hunting around you. So in those cases, especially if you have a run, it needs to be fully covered. Providing shelter is not enough to defeat these birds. Being out there and around human activity will generally keep them away. I find when I go outside, they leave. But do note that it is illegal to harass or attempt to harm a predatory bird. So when we talk about protecting our coop and our run from these types of predators, there's a few things. So chicken wire, despite its name, is not very good at protecting chickens. It's very good at keeping them enclosed in what we want to keep them in. It's not necessarily very good at keeping predators out. It actually tears fairly easily. The holes are kind of big. Raccoons have been known to reach right through it and pull chickens flat out through the wire and obviously kill them. What's better is to use something like hardware cloth, preferably no bigger than 1/2 by 1 inch. Or you can combine chicken wire with some sort of a stronger wire. So on mine, I actually have horse fence, the 2x4 non-climb horse fence, because one side of my run is actually a part of my horse fence anyway. But then I've lined it with chicken wire to prevent small things from coming through that 2x4 size. So because I have the combo of both, it actually works okay. The other thing you can do, if you can, bury or skirt the coop and the run edges, and I have some pictures to show you what I mean by this, to prevent predators from digging under. Particularly coyotes will dig. Some of those other critters will try to dig underneath the edges of your coop to gain access. And so burying 6 to 8 to as deep as you can. I know it's Arizona and the soil is hard and it's really hard to dig, I know that. But as deep as you can. A section of the cloth around the outside edges, or bring a skirt out from the edge of the coop a little bit can help deter those digging predators. And if you have a snake problem, as many of us do, especially in the southern part, consider using 1/4x1/4 hardware cloth for this purpose to help deter snakes. And I didn't put the video in this one, but there is a really good video online if you go to YouTube and search for it about using 1/4x1/4 rather than 1/2x1/2 hardware cloth to stop rattlesnakes from coming in, because some of the smaller baby ones can actually fit right through 1/2x1/2. But 1/4x1/4, they pretty much can't get through. So if possible in your design, everything needs a roof or a wire top. At minimum, the coop. Remember, that's where our chickens are sleeping at night, and at night is when they're the most vulnerable. So as long as at night they're shut up, you're probably going to be in pretty good shape. If you have an attached run and you are having predator problems, or you think you might, I do, I have a lot of problems, then even the run needs a really good top on it. Make sure you're using sturdy door latches, hinges, and hardware that raccoons and stuff can't open, or if you have larger predator problems, that is something that they can't really break very easily. And electric perimeter fencing or additional perimeter fencing may be an additional deterrent to help even keep predators from getting close to the coop. That will work for some, but not all. So this is what I mean by skirting down here, where we've brought the hardware cloth down and skirted out a little bit. That's if you choose to do this rather than digging and burying as they've done here or here, any of those are totally fine and can help stop a predator from choosing to dig underneath. This is a really secure run right here. You see it has a solid top. It has good sides with good supports. We have our coop down here that closes and is fully enclosed, and we have skirting all the way around. We have a few options for some other means of protection. So livestock guardian dogs are very effective if trained properly. This is actually my German Shepherd, who just loves my chickens and will follow them around wherever they are. In this case, they are quite happily dust bathing, and she is just hanging out with him. They only work if they're out there, though. So in my instance, I don't really rely on her exclusively because she's an indoor-outdoor dog. And when she's inside, she can't be outside protecting the chickens. If we have problems with hawks, providing those cover areas, especially if we are free-ranging chickens, so that they have places that they can go hide to get away from hawk dive bombings. External fences and electric fences can help deter some predators. Always secure that flock at night. That's when those chickens are most vulnerable and those predators are often out and about. And additionally, things like motion lights, sprinklers, etc., may help deter predators. I got some motion lights on Amazon for like 30 or 40 bucks. They're solar, so I don't even have to run power out there if you don't have power out to your coop like I don't. They actually work really well. It's a little solar panel and a motion floodlight. And so far it's worked really great. If I go out there, if the dogs go out there or something at night, the thing will come right on. And it can help deter some things if suddenly there's bright light. They may choose to leave. But there's always a risk when we're free ranging a flock during the day, especially if they're unsupervised, that a predator will find them. So let's do a little the good, the bad, and the ugly. So this is actually my coop, and we're going to kind of break it apart a little bit, and I'm going to tell you what I like and what I would change. And then I've got those pictures I want to show you again, and maybe with some of the principles that we've talked about, we can do sort of the same thing. So with my coop, here the good things that I have are lots of ventilation. And like I mentioned, these two sides, I do tend to tarp up in the winter when we're expecting a winter storm, just to help stop some of the drafts from coming in. Only the front is then open. And it just helps to keep that coop a little bit warmer and a little more draft free for those birds during the winter time. But in the summer, it's wide open and it's really great because it doesn't get super hot in there. With my run, however, I have some issues going on, right? So I've used this shade cloth as a roof, which is okay. But as you can see, I have some gaping here. So it's entirely possible that a predator could use that as a point of entry. And you notice I don't have any doors on here. My chickens are free to come in and out. I don't have to let them in and out. They do actually make automatic door covers that will open and close at dawn and dusk, but I haven't invested in one yet. So it's entirely possible a predator could come in here and gain access to my chickens at night. So that's something I should consider changing. You'll notice on my run, I also have down here some fencing panels, some wooden ones. That's just to help sort of block, number one, that's the western side, so it helps to block some of that western afternoon sun, especially in the summertime. But it also helps with blocking wind and draft from coming through the run. It just helps keep it a little nicer in there for them. But I do have lots of space. This is that 2x4 non-climb, and you see I have some chicken wire lining the bottom just to stop chickens from sticking their heads out. This is actually only bird netting. So again, this is something that a predator could theoretically rip through, but it actually has deterred hawks and things like that. So this is where you'll have to assess your level of risk and what predators are likely to come in. I don't know if you can tell from here, you probably can't. That's my external fence out there. So I actually have an external fence all the way around, and no part of this coop or run is up against that external fence. And so that sort of helps too, because my dogs are always out there, usually are out there. It smells like dog out there. And so I don't tend to have a lot of problems with coyotes and things coming right up to my coop or run. So that's something that you might consider when you're thinking about placing your coop. If you have a place where you can do it like that, that's helpful. And let's talk about these ones again that we looked at here at the beginning, now that we maybe know a little bit about coop design. So let's start with our Quonset hut situation here. So the nice thing about this is that you can walk into it. It looks like it's actually lined on the inside. It's the outside, it looks like maybe tarp, but the inside is actually lined with wire. So that's probably pretty good. It means that a predator, even if they got through the tarp, probably can't get through the wire. So as long as his latches are good, I can't tell what he's got going on for nest boxes and roosts. But this might actually work out to be an okay coop if it's designed on the inside properly. This is a really nice one. This part is going to be super, super secure when the chickens go in there at night. It may be a little small. This size is probably only appropriate, just by looking at the picture, I would guess for a very small flock of 4 to 5 birds, maybe 6 at the most. But the nice thing is we have some ventilation here we can open. We have this external access to the nest boxes here, so we don't have to go in. That's really nice. Probably a little short to go in here, but it's possible to get in there and clean it if we needed to. These are probably our litter pans that they could just pull out and dump. The one caution I would have with this is if you live somewhere where it gets very warm, like where I live, this tiny little coop area is going to get pretty hot pretty quickly in the summertime. The only thing I could think of that would help is maybe if you could figure out a way to open part of the roof up a little bit and let some more air out the top, then we might be able to make it okay. This is a really nice coop. We have lots of windows. We have that. I can't tell if that's ventilation. I'm hoping it's ventilation and not just decorative, but it could just be decorative. I don't know. We have, it looks like a very secure coop and run area. I imagine living in the woods, this person may struggle with larger predators like bears, and so they've had to make a very, very secure option for themselves. This little converted shed probably works really well. I see they have some windows that open. I'd probably put one of those metal whirligig things on the top. They're not very expensive. You just cut a hole in the roof and they bolt right on there, and they let hot air out. But it's nice that you can walk all the way in. They probably have their nest boxes and stuff in there. And then they have this nice little run out here that looks pretty solid and well protected. Hopefully they've buried some wire around the outside. It looks like they have a wire top on it as well. So this would be a really nice setup also. My only struggle with the car, as cool as it is I'm not really sure where the chickens are going to roost, and it does seem a little small and it probably isn't very good protection in terms of winter weather if we had a winter storm roll through or something like that. So looks cool, but I'm thinking this is not very practical. And then this little pre-built coop has some similar problems to that one. This area is pretty small and I wish it had a lot more ventilation. If you just had some small hens that you were pinning up at night and you were letting them free range during the day, this would probably be okay. Again, pretty small size though. You're gonna be able to hold a lot more birds in something like this. How are we doing on time? Oh, look at that, we're getting close. So now that we've kind of talked about some of the pluses and minuses to some of the coop features that we want to talk about, let's talk about that year-round egg production and providing supplemental light. I feel like that fits really well in with housing. So for chickens, light actually enters through the eyes and actually to some degree through the skull and stimulates the pineal gland, which then stimulates a few other things, ultimately resulting in the production of follicle-stimulating hormone. So follicle-stimulating hormone, which is stimulated by light, by daylight, causes young pullets to reach sexual maturity, which means that they reach an age where they will start laying eggs. And it also stimulates peak egg production in our already laying hens. So they will lay more eggs when the daylight length is longer. So sometimes I hear people saying, oh, it's colder, they're laying less. It's not necessarily because it's colder, it's because of that decreasing daylight length. That's what's stimulating the drop in egg production. So if you're interested in keeping more peak egg production during the winter time, some supplemental lighting can actually really help. So this link, which I think I can actually, let me see if I can grab it. Nope, I cannot grab it. I'll have to make sure we get it sent to you because I forgot to send it to Yvonne, sorry. Timeanddate.com though, you can actually look at, and I picked Phoenix because it's in the middle of the state. I figured that was pretty reasonable, but you can actually look at the actual daylight lengths for your location. And it will tell you how many hours of daylight you have per day. So Phoenix, Arizona in December, which would be the lowest daylight length of the whole year, gets approximately 10 hours a day of daylight. So for peak egg production, we need closer to 15 to 16 hours of daylight per day. So what we can actually do is provide those hens with supplemental lighting, a 60-watt bulb for every 200 square foot of coop space. So for most of us, that's going to be more than sufficient. Really works very well. I encourage the use of a timer system for this. If you forget to flip that light on or off for even a couple of days, egg production is going to plummet really quickly. So if you can get an inexpensive timer, they make ones that run on solar. If you don't have power out there, they make ones that run on batteries for your light. They make solar lights that will work. You've got some options if you don't have power out to your coop. That's the best way to do it, is to try to put it on a timer if you can, because it's really hard to remember every single day to turn it on and off. So what I would start doing is, as soon as daylight starts dropping below that 15 to 16 hours per day, which I did not look up when that was, but I'm going to guess that that's probably sometime in September, you can actually start turning that light on a little bit in the morning and a little bit in the evening and a little bit more every day. You could probably just change it monthly or every couple of weeks. Use that time and date site to look and see how many hours of daylight you're getting on average for those couple weeks or that month. And add that supplemental light on to make a total of 15 to 16 hours per day of light. If you are starting to do this, like, let's say I wanted to start doing this now. So right now we're getting about 11 and some change hours per day of light. I wouldn't want to just suddenly flip the lights on and give them 16 hours a day. It's really going to confuse your system. So what I'd want to do is I'd want to start by adding 15 to 30 minutes of light per week, and then each week increase that a little bit more. So right now wouldn't really be the ideal time to do that because the light is already increasing. But as we start into the fall, or maybe if you decide to do that and it's like January, that's how you can do it. Just every week add another 15 to 30 minutes until you get up to that 15 to 16 hours per day. So I will tell you, this is primarily for mature hens. One thing we want to be very careful of if we choose to do this, and that extension .umaine.edu publication, I did send to Yvonne to give to everybody, is a really good article on just some general lighting for the coop, for the laying hen, and it also gives some insight on raising pullets using a lighting system. So as a general rule, pullets who are not yet laying should not be on an increasing light system. And one of the reasons for that is that increasing daylight length, like we would normally get in the springtime when we're raising chicks, is what's going to stimulate them to sexual maturity. And we don't want to do that too quickly. We don't want them to start laying eggs too early, like around 17, 18 weeks is too early. They should be starting to lay around 20 to 22. So if they start laying too early, we're risking a few things. Number one, they will probably have smaller eggs over the course of their life. They will never lay as big an egg as they could have laid. We're also risking things like vent prolapse. And also they'll probably lay fewer eggs over their entire lifetime just because it sort of threw things off hormonally and started the process a little bit early. So if we're raising chicks for pullets, for laying hens, and we've gotten our chicks in February, March, right about now, and we're raising them to be productive pullets, productive hens, we don't need to put them on a light system right now. The naturally increasing daylight length that we have is ideal for helping them to develop properly. They will probably be starting to reach peak egg laying production right about the time that our daylight lengths are starting to get short enough to stop them from laying as many eggs. And so this fall would be a really great time as those days start to shorten to go ahead and put those lights on and keep that 15 to 16 hours of daylight over the winter time for them, and you will maintain some really peak egg production out of those girls. If you get some off-season chicks, particularly, if you get them in the summer or if you get them in the fall, keeping a really close eye on that supplemental light so that we don't, if we have other chicks that are on supplemental light, we don't want to mess with their production too much. So be very careful if you get those off-season chicks. That it's a little bit of a complicated question. That time and date can help you, but that extension.umaine.edu publication has some really good information if you decide to get some off-season chicks. And finally, we have a few places where we're trying to post these things and post some more information. My friend Colt's website in Maine and our website here at the University of Arizona, extension.arizona.edu/poultry. I usually recommend for a family of 2 to 4 people or maybe 5 people, 2 to 4 hens is usually about right. Usually I don't say go fewer than 2. I usually say maybe 3. Just that way, if you have, they are flock animals, they do like to live in a group, and that way if you lose one, you still have a couple others. I would say 3 to 4, maybe 5 at the most should keep you in pretty good eggs. And it's a pretty reasonable number to handle too. Yeah, I know a lot of people get them and expect them to start laying pretty quickly, and then they look like they're all fully feathered and ready to go, but they're still not quite there yet. About 20 weeks is when I would start expecting, depending on breed, 18 to 22 weeks to expect those first eggs for you. So usually there's always one dominant hen. So the first thing is make sure that you have plenty of space for them. So those spacing requirements I kind of gave you. I like to provide some stimulation. So if you have things like heads of cabbage, if you hang them on fishing line and hang them up, they like to peck at them and they can't get a whole lot off at once because it like a tennis ball. I like to, when I'm out in my coop, I'll throw out like a flake of hay, and then I'll scatter a bunch of mealworms in it, and they will spend hours scratching that hay apart trying to find every last stinking little mealworm. It'll take them forever. Anything you can do that can help give them some natural behavior. So chickens have a lot of natural behaviors. You think about like them scratching the ground and looking for bugs. Anything you can do to help stimulate that and simulate it can help them be less bored. If that's the problem you're having. If that bully gets too bad to where she's starting to draw blood and things, you can actually take her out for a little while, give the other 2 a few weeks to kind of heal up and start to grow some feathers back. And then when you put her back in, it probably will knock her down the totem pole a peg or 2, and she might be a little less inclined to be a bully because she will no longer be the dominant hen because she was taken out. The other 2 now have their own new pecking order and she's not a part of it. So sometimes I find that helps. Removing the bully hen for a few weeks and then reintroducing her as though she's a brand new chicken can help. Yeah, if she's not drawing blood or pulling feathers and she's just, here or there, peck, peck, peck kind of deal, sometimes that's just dominant behavior and she's not really hurting much. But it would be good to stay ahead of that just in case. So somebody has direct messaged me a question. They have a problem with birds getting into their coop to eat the feed. Will this cause any disease problems for my hens? So this could actually cause some problems. Wild birds can carry things, particularly when we think about like Newcastle disease and that outbreak that they had in California, and I think they had a scare in Flagstaff. Wild birds can carry that. So what I would try to do is block those wild birds out. You have a few options. So number one, if like, for example, my 2x4 non-claim horse fence, one of the reasons that I have the chicken wire on it is because those birds can come right through that 2x4. It doesn't even slow those little finch birds down. They just right through it. So that's one way you could do it, is to put a secondary fence. Chicken wire is fairly cheap, or you could even use bird netting or something similar, just to make the hole smaller so that those little birds can't get in. The other thing you can do is restrict their access to your feed. You can do that in a couple of ways. You can either start limit feeding your chickens, meaning you only give them feed in the morning and in the evening, about as much as they'll clean up, and that's it. You can put the food down and pick it back up. That really only works the best for rodents who tend to come out at night. I don't find that works as well for wild birds. You can also try something like those treacle feeders. I don't know if you've seen the grandpa's feeders, or I have the rat-proof feeders, where the door actually swings this way instead of up and down. But the idea is that the feed is in a contained thing where the chickens have to stand on the little treadle in order to open the feeder to let them eat. And when they step off, it closes, and the wild birds aren't big enough to activate it. It's actually designed to keep rodents out as well. So you could also do something like that. So you don't have to have a rooster. They do offer a small degree of predator protection, warning system type things, but I find that when you don't have a rooster, there's usually that dominant hen will become the rooster. She'll sort of take over his duties, and she'll be the one who always warns the flock when there's a hawk around or whatever. You know, they make their little warning noise. I had one for a while. I did not find that he helped with any sort of dominant pecking behavior in any way that made a difference. You know, every once in a while I would see him run over and like break up a little hen scuffle, but it still happened, and I still had chicken feather picking. So if you don't think that he's worth the hassle, as in he's too loud, which was the problem with mine, he's not going to solve all the problems. So I wouldn't bother unless you really want a rooster. So in terms of mixing multiple breeds, yes and no. I prefer a variety. I like all the pretty colors, and I have one chicken in everything, and I don't really ever have two of the same very, very often. The only time it will really matter is, number one, if you want to sell eggs and you want your eggs to be consistent. So you want a consistent size and a consistent color, and then it would help you to have multiples of the same breed or all the same breed. There are some differences in how aggressive certain breeds tend to be, and by which I mean like how dominant they tend to be, and also size differences as well. As long as you have plenty of space, plenty of feed and water stations, which I didn't even really talk about today, and they have plenty of things to keep them from getting too bored, you should not have a problem with mixed breeds. If you are maybe trying to cram a few extra chickens into a little bit of a smaller space, or you know they're going to be super confined for a lot of the day, then maybe you might consider having more of the same breed, just because you'll have less problems with one dominant picking on a really non-dominant type breed. But as long as you're doing all the other things and you have the right, you know, plenty of space and all that stuff, then mixing breeds is totally fine. So there are a few things, particularly if you're not dealing with the Harris hawks, if it's more like the red tails and the Coopers and the ones that sort of hunt singly and they like to dive bomb like that, there are a couple things that you can do if you can't cover the entire run. So number one, I would cover what you can, even if it's just with bird netting. The hawks they could get through, but they'll struggle. The other thing that you can do, there's a few things. People will do things like string just wires across in like a crisscross pattern across the top of an area. I'm talking just single strands of wire or anything visible, and keep the holes sort of, you know, not too big-ish. And what that does is it disrupts their dive bomb. They can't effectively bomb down and scoop a chicken because they will hit those wires on the way down. And then the other thing you can do is make some sort of cover that your chickens can go underneath. So you maybe will make some maybe 2 foot tall, almost like a little coffee side table that the chickens can go under. Make 4 or 5 of them, depending on the size of your space, and just sort of space them out around the garden so that when the chickens see the hawk coming, they have something to go underneath to hide from that dive bomb activity. And that it obviously won't be 100%. The only way to be 100% would be to roof the whole thing. That will at least give the chickens a fairly good chance and should cut down on a lot of the predation.
Well, we're glad you all came tonight. It's great to have you. And I hope this information has helped guide you to make some changes that'll help your egg-laying operations. Thank you everyone for coming tonight and spending the hour and a half talking chickens. And thank you, Ashley, very much for your time as well. All right. Well, everyone have a great evening and see you next month. Good night.